Dr. Kerry Kriger has spent much of his life now devoted as the perhaps single doctor, nonprofit director solely devoted to amphibian conservation in the world. We are very fortunate that he decided, because of the progressive nature of our community, to locate in Santa Cruz County. And part of our active goals now of reaching out to nonprofits in the county and increasing our involvement and relationships with other nonprofits is really, I think, exemplified by this particular speech that you're about to hear. Dr. Kriger has researched, spent many a damp, muddy day out in the wilds of Australia, Africa, all around the world. 5 minutes? Oh. He has perhaps listened and learned to imitate more frog language than any human on the planet, which we're going to be fortunate to be able to hear some of his frog impersonations. One of the things that I've discovered from knowing him and working with him is that, in fact, every frog has a different language. The traditional old ribbit is really just our own little anamorphism, and in fact, every frog has a different call, and it's part of their unique imprint as individual species. And more importantly than that, though, than the cutesy side and the funny side, which is what I think motivates people about amphibians, is that frogs and amphibians are keystone species, which means how frogs go, basically the rest of the biospheres go. So the more we track and learn about what's going on with frogs, because as you'll learn, frogs are in a very dangerous state, very precarious state right now. And this area has some flagship amphibians. We have some frogs, toads, newts, and salamanders here that are found nowhere else in the world. And by attuning ourselves to that part of our local neighborhood, that part of the environment we live in, we in fact really key ourselves into the state of the environment itself. So the more we learn about frogs, what we're really learning about is everything else. And to me, that is really a key component of what Dr. Kriger's work is. So I would like to give a warm welcome and thank you for coming here and presenting to us, to Dr. Kriger. Everybody, Dr. Kerry Kriger, SaveTheFrogs.com.
Frogs are the most famous amphibians, but they're only one type of amphibians. There's 5 main groups of amphibians. The frogs and toads are pretty similar. They both have arms and legs, no tail. Toads are slightly different than frogs. One of the big differences is this big parotoid gland right there that's packed full of toxins to help protect them. So the frogs and toads, and then there are newts, arms and legs and a tail. Here's one of the more common newts in California. California newt, you all have seen that? You have a lot of them running around, orange newt. So if you handle them, don't stick your finger in your mouth afterwards, because they can actually kill you. They're so toxic. So, but you can handle them, just wash your hands afterwards. And then the salamanders. So newts and salamanders are pretty similar as well. Arms, legs, and tails, but salamanders tend not to be poisonous.
Are they in the frog family? Sorry.
They're not in the frog family. They're all amphibians, but there's basically the frogs and toads, and then the newts and salamanders, and then our final type of amphibian, the caecilians. So not many people have heard of caecilians because they don't live in the United States. They're in Central South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and they lack arms and legs, no tail. Some of them don't even have eyes because they live underground. So there are your 5 types of amphibians. And just to be clear, amphibians and reptiles are different. So here's a rainforest dragon. He's cool, but he's not an amphibian. One of the quick ways you can tell is because he has scales. So birds and reptiles have scales. Amphibians have smooth skin usually. Another big difference is that reptiles, like birds, have hard-shelled eggs, whereas amphibians, like these foothill yellow-legged frogs, which live around here, and the California red-legged frogs, which live around here, have jelly-like eggs with no hard protective coating on the outside. So these guys, the foothill yellow-legged frogs, California red-legged frogs, the females lay the eggs in the water, glue them down when they're in the streams, glue them to some rocks, because if a big storm comes, otherwise they'd all get washed away and die. And then out from the embryos, for a lot of frog and toad species, pops out a tadpole. And that's another big difference between amphibians and reptiles, is the larval stage. Tadpoles have gills, not lungs. And most of them are herbivores, not carnivores. They'll be eating algae, though they can potentially eat other tadpoles when times get tough. So, red-webbed gladiator frog, found this guy in Panama in a swamp in the rainforest. Amphibians, most of them are amphibious, which means they have two lives, one on the land, one in the water. And they're in the water. A lot of amphibians can, a lot of frogs and salamanders may not even have lungs because they have thin, permeable skin. They can absorb water and oxygen right through their skin. So here's Purling Brook Falls, where I did a lot of my research in Australia. So I go out there at night. Most amphibians, especially in Australia, a little less so here, most of them are nocturnal, meaning they come out at night. So I'd go out there at night in Purling Brook. At the top and down at the bottom, there were probably 10 amphibian species out there, and I'd have to go out and find whatever species I was looking for, and I'd hear all these different species calling, so I'd have to know what I was listening to. And like Mark said, every amphibian species has a different call. Only the males call. They're calling to defend their territory or to attract a mate. So there'd be a lot of noise at Purling Brook Falls at night. This guy, Cascade Treefrog, was one of my main study subjects, and I'd have to go catch them, but they're real small and green, usually hanging out on leaves and camouflaged, and they'd quiet down when I got close, so I'd have to call to them to get them to call. So I go, and then they'd call back. So I got pretty good at making calls, because if I couldn't make the good call, then I couldn't find them, and then I figured I wouldn't get my degree. So got good at making calls. So she was down at the bottom, so female. So she wasn't calling, but the males would be calling to her. It's got nice eyes, emerald spots, emerald spotted tree frog. My favorite frog, southern orange-eyed tree frog. And yeah, so they're my favorite frog because they like to hang out on the sides of waterfalls in the rainforest, and they come out on very wet nights, pouring rain. So when you're around those guys, they're all calling, and you kind of feel like you're in the thick of it because it's pouring rain at night in the rainforest on the side of a waterfall. So they've got cool places to live. Bonk, bonk, Pobblebonk, where they get their name. So that's a eastern sedge frog, common frog. That's his vocal sac. That's how they make their sound. Put a lot of air in that, and then get some wind coming through, making pressure. And arc, great barred frog. They live at the top of the falls. There's their bars, stripes on their legs. There's 5 types of barred frogs. 4 of them are endangered, not this one. They're doing all right still. Good, thanks. Striped marsh frog. Marsupial frog. So these guys are pretty neat. They're called a marsupial frog. They're not a marsupial, but they have this little pouch here. And the female lays eggs in the moist leaf litter. They bypass the aquatic tadpole stage, and out of the egg pops a little froglet. And this guy, full grown, it's a male. He's about the size of my thumbnail. So you can imagine that the little froglets, 15 of them crawl in there and hang out for about a month. So they're really, really small. Okay, so frogs worldwide are in a lot of trouble. About at least 2,000 species are threatened with extinction, meaning that if nothing's done to help them out and remove those threats, we can expect them to go completely extinct, gone in the next, sometime in the near future. So it's about a third of all amphibian species, and they're the most threatened group of animals on the planet. About 12% of birds are threatened, 25% of mammals. So amphibians are in a lot of trouble. About 200 species have gone completely extinct in the last 30 years. So this rate of extinction, from the best we can tell by looking at the fossil record, is several thousand times faster than amphibians should be going extinct. And California has a big problem as well. There's 16 threatened amphibian species in California, 3 of which live right here in Santa Cruz County: the California red-legged frog, Santa Cruz long-toed salamander, and the California tiger salamander. The main problem worldwide, why frogs are disappearing, is habitat destruction, forests getting chopped down for timber or cattle ranching, urban expansion, housing developments going up, malls being built, parking lots, swamps being drained, etc. So habitat destruction is a big problem, especially in lowland areas, because that's where most of the human population is, and we don't have a lot of protected area in the lowlands. Most protected area tends to be mountainous areas because they look nice. Overharvesting for the pet and food trades, big problem for brightly colored species like this blue poison dart frog and strawberry poison dart frog. Brightly colored species are highly sought after by pet enthusiasts, and most of those brightly colored species come from tropical developing countries where there aren't many regulations, and people are looking for any type of income they can find. So several million frogs get imported into the U.S. each year for use as pets. And also the food trade is a huge problem. At least 100 million frogs are taken out of the wild each year for use as food. And Americans consume about 20% of the world's frog legs. Our frog leg consumption is on the rise in all types of restaurants: Asian restaurants, Tex-Mex, roadhouses, French restaurants, etc. Invasive species are a huge problem in California. Trout have gotten stopped in the high Sierra Nevadas in naturally fishless lakes because fishermen want to fish up there. But naturally fishless lakes, the amphibians have evolved no defenses against fish. The tadpoles are not camouflaged. They don't know how to hide. They're not toxic. So when these trout get introduced into these lakes, they all get eaten. So mountain yellow-legged frogs have had huge problems. They used to be one of the most abundant frogs in California, and now they're gone from at least 90% of their historic localities because fishing groups and Department of Fish and Game have been flying over the Sierra Nevadas for the last 50 years, dropping out hundreds of thousands of baby trout into these lakes. American bullfrogs are a huge problem in California. American bullfrogs got brought to California. They're native to the eastern U.S. In the 1890s, the California gold miners had nearly eaten all of the California red-legged frogs, which is why the California red-legged frogs are still endangered. And so the American bullfrogs got brought in as a replacement food source, but they got loose, took over California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, Colorado. They're all over the place. They're a huge frog, America's largest frog. Frogs are called gape-limited predators, meaning they eat anything that fits in their mouth. And that's what the American bullfrogs do. They eat all types of frogs, snakes, birds, bats, anything that fits in their mouth. So, big problem there. Red swamp crayfish are in Southern California. They're used by fishermen as bait, and they escape and like to eat newts and salamanders and red-legged frogs. They're, I think, as far north as Big Sur. Hopefully they won't continue to move north or get released in Santa Cruz County. Pollution and pesticides. Amphibians spend a lot of time in the water. Gravity brings everything to the water. Amphibians have permeable skin that's absorbing pollutants and pesticides. So gets in the water, and or else it goes up in the airstream, gets carried by clouds to the nearest mountains, and then dumped down and causes a lot of problems. Atrazine. Anyone heard of atrazine? Okay. So atrazine is one of the world's most common pesticides. It's made by Syngenta, the world's largest pesticide company. Syngenta is celebrating 50 years of atrazine. That's too bad because atrazine turns male frogs into females at 2.5 parts per billion. It's an endocrine disruptor, causes decreased immune defenses, hermaphroditism, complete sex reversal, and 80 million pounds of it are used in America each year, primarily on corn. And there's 18,000 registered pesticides in the U.S. So lots of problems from pesticides. Global warming, climate change is a big problem in cloud forests. Cloud forests have many amphibian species. I heard about a site in Colombia that has 100 amphibian species at one location. So a lot of these cloud forests, there's lots of species, but when the earth warms, the clouds rise, all that habitat dries up for the frogs, and then they have problems. This arboreal chorus frog, they live in Yellowstone National Park, the world's oldest national park, been protected since 1872. So in Yellowstone, there's a big problem with droughts. The last 50 years, there have been persistent droughts. And about a quarter of the ponds have dried up in the last 20 years or so. So 3 of the 4 amphibian species in the park are on the decline. And that's what's happening in the world's oldest protected park. So you can imagine that climate change is having an even larger problem elsewhere where land is not protected. Infectious diseases, that's my specialty. I spent 4 years in Australia studying the ecology of the chytrid fungus. Chytrid fungus has traveled rapidly around the world in the last half century due to humans shipping about 100 million amphibians around the world each year. We ship amphibians all over the place for food, pets, bait, laboratory usage, and for zoos, and generally with very little disease testing. So we ship sick amphibians, they get loose or they get set free on purpose, or the water they were held in escapes into the environment, and then native frog populations get infected and cause lots of problems. Chytrid fungus does really well living in cool, moist areas. So mountains, Sierra Nevadas, North Cascades, the Andes, Central America, Queensland, Australia, all those mountain areas have big problems with chytrid fungus. Once it gets there, amphibians can go completely extinct within several months of its arrival. So chytrid fungus has driven about 100 amphibian species to complete extinction. In terms of biodiversity loss, it's the worst disease ever recorded for any type of organism. And like most wildlife diseases, once it's out there in the wild, there's no known way to eradicate it. And it's only one of many diseases. We didn't even know chytrid fungus existed until 1998. So there's plenty we don't know about. As long as we're shipping amphibians all over the place, new diseases are going to spread. Limb deformities. Here's a Pacific tree frog from Aptos with 8 legs. I saw a picture of one with 16 legs. Limb deformities are on the rise because we're changing water quality, adding things into the water like pesticides that decrease immune defenses, and then increase fertilizers, change water quality, and allow there to be more of these trematode parasites which burrow into the hind limbs of tadpoles and cause these problems. So frogs are really important. They're eating ticks, mosquitoes, and flies that carry infectious diseases like West Nile virus, malaria, that we don't want. So they're keeping us healthy. They're eating pests to our agricultural crops. Natural insecticides is what frogs are. So they're helping us out. Tadpoles filter, they eat algae, and they filter the water that we drink. So they're helping us. And they're serving as food for snakes, birds, fish, monkeys, dragonflies, etc. So they're really important in the ecosystem. Frogs disappear, lots of wildlife species have trouble. They're bioindicators. That means they're a sensitive species. When there's a disturbance to the environment, they're one of the first to experience problems. So they're telling us how healthy our ecosystems are. And this is for a few reasons. They're amphibious. They're dependent on healthy land and water. And they've got permeable skin so they can absorb pesticides. And also they're very slow to move. If their forest gets chopped down or their pond gets drained, then they're pretty much dead. They can't just move on to the next location. And they've been around in more or less their current form for hundreds of millions of years. And so they're very strong creatures. They survived all types of environmental disturbances and outlived the dinosaurs. Yet right now, in the last half century, we've driven about a third of amphibian species to the verge of extinction. And frogs are really important. Frogs and other amphibians important in medical research that benefits humans. 10% of Nobel Prizes in physiology and medicine have come from research that depended on frogs. So when a frog species disappears, there goes any potential to benefit human health through the continued existence of that species. And finally, frogs are really cool. So that's the only reason we really need to save frogs. People like frogs. Y'all like frogs? Yeah? Yeah. Very good. Okay, so frogs are cool. So we need to save frogs. And luckily, there's lots of easy ways that everybody can help save frogs just by improving their day-to-day actions, their ecological footprint. So not using pesticides is really important. I already told you about the bad things pesticides can do to frogs. Also, frogs and humans share about half our DNA.
If the projector turned off.
Mark?
Yeah, there's a power flash.
Here we go.
We'll come back. It's just going to take a second now. There it is.
There you go.
We just had a voltage surge.
All right.
Never happened.
Frogs and humans share about half our DNA. So if we're putting bad pesticides in our backyards, we're not only affecting our local frogs, but also our children and everybody else around. Not eating frog legs. Simple thing to do. As I said, about 100 million frogs are taken out of the wild each year for use as food. There's several hundred million more that are farm-raised. The farm-raised frogs have very high infection rates. Several million American bullfrogs have been being shipped into California each year for use as food. And a recent study tested about 600 of these bullfrogs and found that 62% of them had chytrid fungus, which has driven 100 amphibian species to complete extinction. So frog legs trade is bad for lots of reasons. Slow down driving on wet nights. 700 million cars on the road. Lots of frog mortality. They like hanging out on roads. They have to cross roads. They're slow. So if it's wet, drive slow. Don't stock non-native fish in your pond or stream. I know a lot of people like having koi ponds and putting all types of foreign things in their yards, but it's best to always go with native vegetation, native fish. Stay native and everything will be a lot better off. Turning off the tap is really important. Throughout the western United States especially, a lot of our rivers and tributaries get completely sucked dry for home water use, farms, etc. And when we suck our rivers and tributaries dry, that's basically destroying habitat for frogs. They've got nowhere left to breed. Also the hot water. The water is probably being heated by a coal-fired power plant, contributing to global warming and pumping lots of bad particulate matter into the air. Not purchasing bottled water. Simple thing, Americans go through 5 times as much bottled water as we did 20 years ago, and the whole bottled water process is very environmentally intense. Using rechargeable batteries is easy and will save you money. Americans go through billions of batteries each year, and they're packed full of heavy metals and all kinds of bad things that eventually leach into the water bodies where frogs live. And dispose of all your electronics. You can call up your city and say, where can I recycle my electronics? Never purchase wild-caught amphibians. If you feel the need to get a frog as a pet, make sure that it was captive raised. If it doesn't say captive raised, you should assume that it was wild caught, because it probably was. Eating less meat is an easy thing. Deforestation in the Amazon, #1 cause is for cattle ranching. Eat locally grown organic food. So we're extremely lucky in Santa Cruz County to have lots of options, farmers markets. And then all of you should become amphibian biologists. Yeah. Because then you get to go out and catch frogs and make frog calls and help save the frogs. Okay, so please tell everyone you know about what's happening to frogs, because right now most people still don't know. If people don't know, they're not going to improve their day-to-day actions, and certainly our politicians and our businesses are not going to feel the need to protect frogs or to go out on a limb to protect something that maybe people will say, why are you protecting frogs? So if everybody knows frogs are in trouble and important, then a whole lot more will get done to protect them. And that's one of the reasons I started Save the Frogs. I founded Save the Frogs in May 2008, not too long after I returned from Australia. When I finished my PhD, I concluded that there needed to be a whole lot more getting done to save the frogs that was not getting done. And so I'll tell you a bit about what we do at Save the Frogs. And definitely check out SaveTheFrogs.com is our website. We've got all kinds of amphibious information for students, teachers, and everybody else, ways to get involved. So one of the first things I did was came up with Save the Frogs Day. I thought it would be a great way to raise awareness with politicians. And I sent a letter to my then governor, Tim Kaine of Virginia, told him what was happening with frogs, asked him to legally recognize Save the Frogs Day in the state of Virginia, which he did, which I thought was great. So now we know that Tim Kaine, when environmental issues come up, at least he'll know their effect on frogs. Another thing with Save the Frogs Day, I thought it would be great to get students and teachers involved. There's not any state-mandated amphibian education going on as far as amphibian conservation. So Save the Frogs Day is a way to get students and teachers involved. We've got lots of free educational materials and ideas. My goal with Save the Frogs Day is to provide people with educational materials, ideas, motivation, inspiration to get them out in their own communities protecting frogs. So the first Save the Frogs Day, we got 40 events happening in 15 countries. And these are some kids out in Bangladesh who just got a talk on frogs using, so that was the first Save the Frogs Day. And I didn't have much volunteer assistance back then or much money, but still got all this happen. So I thought, wow, that's pretty great. Let's see what we can do the next year. So Save the Frogs Day, most recent Save the Frogs Day, was the largest day of amphibian education and conservation action in the planet's history. We had 104 events in 21 countries. Thanks. So, and thanks to all the people who, took part, and it's basically just getting people active to go out and do something to raise awareness of frogs, protect frogs. So what we had going on, well, first of all, we got Save the Frogs Day officially recognized in Santa Cruz by Mayor Mike Rotkin, who came to my talk at the Monarch Community School that day and helped us make frog calls with the kids. And then, we had teachers and scientists talking about frogs all around the world, and we had some scientists taking people out looking for frogs so that they got a first-hand experience with frogs. We had some habitat restoration projects going on at Elkhorn Slough. We got a lot of publicity around the world. Front page of Le Monde, the largest paper in France. So France is the #1 frog legs importing country in the world. So I thought that was great because it's probably the first time most French people have ever thought about their frog leg habit. We also had 4 protests at a restaurants in Texas, Maryland, and Virginia that have refused to stop selling frogs or acknowledge any of our letters about them. 3rd annual Save the Frogs Day is coming up April 29th. Hopefully we'll get at least 200 events in 30+ countries, so hopefully all of you will go out and talk to your local teachers for certain and get them involved in Save the Frogs Day. And one of our things we're going to do this year for Save the Frogs Day, we're going to have a big rally in Washington, D.C. to raise awareness of atrazine issues. Atrazine is currently under review by the EPA. It's not often that any pesticide, once approved, comes up for review, but there are so many known negative effects of atrazine. It's under review, but most Americans have never heard of it, and if no one's heard of it, no one's going to be complaining, and Syngenta, with $11 billion with which to lobby, will probably win. So, however, if we make sure most Americans know about atrazine, I'm sure we can get it banned. So another thing I do, I've given about 45 presentations this year to community groups, nonprofits, businesses, schools, universities, to raise awareness of frog issues. Providing training for scientists. I went down to Panama last year and taught 25 Latin American biologists how to detect the chytrid fungus, because there's a huge problem with chytrid fungus in Latin America, and very few people who know how to detect it. If you can't detect it, you can't do research on it. So I speak Spanish. I taught that course in Spanish. I'm going to start giving some talks in Spanish in the Watsonville area to students. We saved some Florida pig frogs. Restaurant Gary Danko in San Francisco was serving them up, and I sent Gary Danko a letter and said, please remove your pig frogs from your menu to help frogs, and then we won't have to protest at your restaurant. And he said, sure, we'll remove them. So that was great. And we got Wegmans, which is a big supermarket chain on the East Coast, to remove frog legs from 76 of their supermarkets. And the world's largest protest in defense of frog population, September 4th, we had 15 people out there at this restaurant that's never responded to any of our supporters' 2,000 plus letters to them about their frog leg sales. And 8 of them were kids. These two, 4th grader and 6th grader, I had spoken to their classes a year ago about frogs, and then they were proactive and inspired to save frogs and got 6 of their friends to go out. And so I thought that was pretty neat. Keeping non-native frogs out of California is really important. So we, Save Frog Supporters sent almost 1,200 letters to the California Fish and Game Commission in May, and I testified at the hearing, and we won with a 3-2 vote to we got California to stop issuing permits for the importation of non-native frogs and turtles into the state for use as food. So California is the first state to stop issuing permits, and right now I'm working with the mayor and the Santa Cruz Fish and Game Commission to get the importation and sale of American bullfrogs actually banned in Santa Cruz City and County, and then hopefully move that to the state. Right now it's just, there's no permits being issued, but it's not illegal. I'd actually like it to be illegal, because bullfrogs have no place in California. They're not from here. All they do is damage our ecosystem and cost us a lot of money whenever we're trying to protect species. We always have to remove the bullfrogs. It costs a lot of money. Not good. So let's get rid of them. California tiger salamander. We helped get them listed as threatened under the California State Endangered Species Act. We sent 432 letters to the commission, and this vote we won 3-2. All these votes seem to go 3-2, so it's really important to keep on top of the Fish and Game Commission. Protecting wilderness. If we don't protect it, then it's going to end up looking like that. Hochstetter's frog and Archie's frog. Archie's frog has been called the world's most evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered frog species. These 2 frogs are in New Zealand, and the New Zealand government wanted to open up some of their last habitat to mining, which would have almost certainly driven them to extinction. And we got 1,200 letters sent to the New Zealand government and got them to throw that idea away. Right now, working on saving the California red-legged frogs, one of Santa Cruz's endangered amphibian species. As I said, they nearly got eaten to extinction in the 1890s by the California gold miners, and they're still being eaten by the American bullfrogs. They've got lots of problems. We're working on raising money to restore Antonelli Pond. It's looking highly likely that a Santa Cruz company is about to give us $5,000 to get this project going. So hopefully that'll come through. And the California red-legged frogs live at this pond on the west side. It's right near Natural Bridges and Long Marine Lab. But they've got lots of problems from invasive fish, non-native fish, non-native bullfrogs living there, and then lots of invasive weeds that cause them problems in their upland habitat. So we're going to restore Antonelli Pond and get some a better California red-legged frog population right there in Santa Cruz. We also, we have a Build a Frog Pond contest going on right now. This is the first time we've done it, and I know a lot of you are probably homeowners, so if you want to have some more frogs on your property, hopefully you already have some, then you should check out the Build a Frog Pond contest, which basically invites schools and homeowners to build frog ponds on their property and document it through video, stories, pictures that we can then add to our website to educate and inspire other people to build frog ponds and cover the world in good frog habitat like it used to be. Acquiring critical habitat. So Save the Frog's only 2.5 years old. We haven't raised that much money, certainly not enough to buy land, but that's definitely one of my goals because habitat destruction is the #1 cause of frog extinctions worldwide. So not only buying land in rainforests where there's very high amphibian biodiversity, but right here in Santa Cruz County, Santa Cruz long-toed salamander is extremely endangered, and there's only 22 populations left. 20 live in Santa Cruz County, so I think it's really important to save Santa Cruz long-toed salamanders. Santa Cruz is one of the most environmentally friendly places in the world. If we can't save our own salamander, then doesn't bode well for other places. So we've got to set a good example and do a lot of work to save these salamanders. We got the Race to Stop Dissections contest going on. Right now, lots of schools in the U.S. and all over the world dissect frogs. Not many teachers know where the frogs are coming from. A lot of them are taken out of the wild. Otherwise, they're farm raised, spread diseases. There's lots of digital software alternatives to dissection. So my goal is to get dissections out of all U.S. public schools within 3 years. And Rachel here is helping because she's got her students making a film so that we can raise some awareness of the dissection problem. And what the contest is, it's asking schools, students, and teachers to do the work, to organize, write letters to their school boards, and say, hey, please stop dissecting frogs in our school board. So let the students do the work, learn the skills, and get the job done. That's the contest. Stopping the trade of wild-caught amphibians for use as pets is really important. There's no reason that we should be taking amphibians out of the wild to sell as pets. And then right now we've got some $500 awards and scholarships for students. It's certainly one of my long-term goals to be able to give full PhD scholarships. The more money we have for scholarships for students, the more students are going to choose to go into amphibian conservation fields, and then we'll have more lifelong amphibian conservationists. This is a public service announcement. Big 6x6 foot posters we've got up in about 5 airports around the country. We've been given free advertising space by Clear Channel, which is great, so raising awareness of climate issues. We got a Save the Frogs art contest and poetry contest going on. Easy ways for teachers who may not have any amphibian experience to get their kids involved. Saving some frogs. So that one from a college student in San Francisco at San Francisco State University. It's from a, I think, 13-year-old in Hawaii. The first piece of art ever submitted to Save the Frogs. That was the under 10-year-old contest winner last year. So our neon frog, so let's see. I'll recite to you our grand prize winning frog poem from 2009. This is by Brittany Bellinger, 12 years old, from Stockton, California. And it's called Almost Gone. Frogs, the pinwheel of our earth, the binding of our book, the balance of our world, almost gone. The wheel will slowly stop turning, the binding slowly unravel, the balance disturbed. Frogs, the glue holding our ecosystem together, slowly beginning to fade like the perfect morning, fading to a thick canopy of darkness. Our world as we know it will change. The frogs are the answer, the key to turn the lock, the cure to many diseases. But they're almost gone. What will you do? So,
That was a 12-year-old?
12-year-old, yeah. So yeah, Save the Frogs poetry contest and art contest, open to any ages. So if you know good artists or teachers, please tell them about the contest. And So right now, Save the Frogs, we're extremely dependent on volunteers. I'm the only full-time employee. I have 1 to 2 part-time assistants, and then the rest is volunteers all around the world. And if anyone wants to help out, regardless of your background, we can find something for you to do. So please let me know if you want to help out in any respect. And right over here, if anyone wants, we got some cool organic cotton t-shirts, stickers, wristbands, pins, tote bags made of 7 recycled plastic bottles. So that's it. Thanks for helping Save the Frogs by telling everyone you know about Save the Frogs. And thanks a lot for having me. That's it. Thanks.
Any questions? Anybody have some questions they like?
So what's the local frogs that hang around redwoods that we hear all the time in our
If the one you'd hear the most is probably the Pacific Treefrog.
That does rip.
Yeah. Small.
lot
What's
of
that?
You didn't rip it one time.
I did. Well, I'll let you do it. All of you know it, so you guys should start a chorus. Yeah.
They actually do.
They're gonna be the most audible species around.
Are you from this area?
I am not. I grew up in Virginia, and then I lived here for a year in '98, '99, and then I returned here in February 2010.
So you're
this year.
kind of hanging around here now?
Well, I'll be hanging out.
Everywhere.
Theoretically, Save the Frogs. We have an office downtown, and I moved here in February to bring Save the Frogs here and to make it a base. So I'll be here.
Down in Monterey, Laguna Seca Raceway has a big frog pond. I don't know what's in it.
Okay.
But there are a lot of bullfrogs, and I figured they're not native. I would not be surprised if they would be receptive to rectifying that. I mean, to be more
Yeah.
native. Just
All right.
so you're aware of it.
Well, yeah, I was not aware of it.
Monterey
But
County Parks.
It's a very
Okay.
famous raceway.
yeah, I know the raceway.
Yeah.
It's also
So-
where the Dead played, which is
And the Pope's been there, yeah. So, just so you know, I mean, I
Maybe
don't
we
know a
can
lot
get
of
the
people
Pope there removing the bullfrogs.
That's it, but yeah, I don't know if you, it's a, they use it a lot for mosquito control because they
Okay.
have a couple of ponds there. And I don't know if you want to, I mean, I'll mention it too.
Yeah,
when I
I'll-
see 'em, but
Do
just
you
so
know them? Do you work there?
I don't work there, but I have friends that work there.
You know
All right.
everybody.
Well, we'll talk.
But yeah, Monterey
Yeah.
County Parks and a
Gary,
group-
that other interesting that's important is that's one of the most well known outdoor concert venue spots.
Yeah.
And,
All right.
well, my point is though that there's a couple different organizations that run that place, the Monterey County Parks and a group called Scramp who runs the actual racetrack. So,
Okay.
but I could try from the Scramp end because I know them, but you know, you might just kind of, if you want to put a bug in
Yeah.
counties here, I'll do that too.
Yep.
It's always
Okay.
bugged me about what kind of frogs they really got in there, but native would be
We'll find out.
yeah, more appropriate. I think.
The American bullfrog, the invasive scourge of the West, is that what you're saying? Are they edible?
Yeah, they are edible. That's why they're all over there. Invasive species in about 15 countries where they don't belong because they're the #1 frog farm raised for food around the world. So frog farms are proliferating around the world. Frogs inevitably escape, and the bullfrogs do a very good job living wherever they happen to be.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Katie.
Okay. How easy is it to distinguish a bullfrog from a red-legged frog? So that if, say, like I know a lot of people have talked to me about like being interested in controlling the bullfrog population by doing the go out at night with spotlights and
Yeah.
you shine in their eyes. Is that an effective way of getting rid of bullfrogs?
Yeah, they can be confused if you're not too familiar with them.
Right.
So what I'm told is that the best time of the year is late summer. The California red-legged frogs have already left the ponds, but the bullfrogs will still be there. So you're going to have less chance of confusing them in the late summer, and then you can potentially drain the pond to kill off the tadpoles as well, because bullfrog tadpoles will remain for multiple years in the pond.
But the red-legged frogs that
Red-legged frogs will take off in May or so.
But their tadpoles.
Their
aren't
tadpoles will not usually stay for more than a year. So some tadpoles tadpoles of certain species metamorphose within a few weeks.
Right.
Some of them can stay a few years as tadpoles. So the bullfrogs come August or so, their tadpoles are still going to be there, and the adults may still be hanging around, but California red-legged frogs have probably moved on, so that's the safest time to reduce confusion.
Another question.
Some frogs aren't poisonous, but some are.
Correct. Yeah, so most toads are poisonous. Frogs, it's usually the brightly colored species like the poison dart frogs that are poisonous. So frogs the poisons are to make it less likely that a predator wants to eat them. And that's why certain frogs jump really erratically. They'll jump all over the place. They may not have poisons, but they can jump to escape their predator.
Oh, I know why Kerry Kriger kills frogs.
Why does it kill frogs?
Because frogs don't breathe through their mouth, they breathe through the skin,
They're-
and if something knocks off the skin, they can't breathe.
Yep, they're very dependent on their skin. So chytrid is a skin disease. Good job. I didn't even tell you guys that chytrid is a skin disease. So.
Or
I would just think, I mean, if it's somewhere near a water body, I mean, toads, all the amphibians can travel several kilometers. And if this is the right time of year, it's wet and cool, they'll be out and about. So even if it's not right near water body, they'll just start moving until they hear the distant call of their relatives. And
are toads any less amphibious? I know they're amphibians, but do they spend less amount of their time in water than frogs?
it just depends on the species. I can't think of any fully aquatic toads. There are fully aquatic frogs that never leave the water, but toads definitely, they have tadpoles and spend time at the water.
So we were always told as children to never handle frogs because the acid on our skin. My mother always told us girls that.
I've never.
Is that a myth or?
I think it's a myth. You would want, if you're going to touch one, you'd probably want your hands to be wet, just so that you're not taking important moisture from their skin. If it's a wet night, it doesn't matter. They'll get their moisture replaced. But if it's dry out, then that's important. When I would catch frogs for my PhD, we would always catch them by putting our hand into a small sandwich bag and catch them like that. Not only because it's easier to catch them, they can't jump through your fingers, but because then you're not touching them, which means you're not spreading disease from this frog to the next one that you catch. So best for, if you're only going to touch one frog, that's not too important, but if you're going to touch a second frog, if you touch it, then you touch the next, you could be transferring disease. So either a wet hand if it's just one frog, or just use a sandwich bag to catch it.
Thank you for the advice. We're going to
Yep.
be doing that this weekend.
Came to the right place.
Chytrid does affect toads, yeah. The golden toad is a famous toad from Costa Rica that went rapidly extinct in the late 1980s, and it most likely went extinct from chytrid fungus. Yosemite toads have a lot of problems too. So yeah, toads, chytrid fungus can affect probably any amphibian species, though some will go extinct and some do fine with it.
Where can you find newts and salamanders?
Newts and salamanders in the woods around here on a wet night.
In Mommy's bathroom.
Once we had one in the bathroom.
It's a warm, wet place.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm assuming it's safe to release them in the creeks, right? We found one.
If you yeah, generally always, if you're going to release something, then it should be to its natal location, where it came from.
We're
is
right off
ideally.
Highway 9, and it was one of those things where we have a creek that goes by
Yep.
our house, so we just figured that was the safest place to put it.
Correct.
It was wet.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
It's,
All right.
we have, right now, we have like several tree frogs on our property that are always singing to each other. Do they mate year round? Is there mating going on right now?
Right now is definitely the season because it's started to rain a lot. So in most places in the world, springtime and early summer is when amphibians are going to be active, but because California is so hot and dry, it's kind of reversed here in that a lot of the amphibians come out in the late fall, winter, when it's raining. So slightly reversed. There's a lot of amphibians out during the day as well in California, which is kind of strange. So right now is definitely the start of amphibian season right now. Okay, so thanks a lot for having me.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Kriger. I think our first attempt at bringing in a guest speaker was a rousing success. I really want to thank him. I think it was very appropriate. We're big supporters of Save the Frogs. The RRA would like to officially thank you. And
thank you.
We are another association that supports your work.
Thank you, and special thanks to Mark, because he's a big help to Save the Frogs and working on setting us up a Save the Frogs art fundraiser and hopefully some benefit concerts.
Nice.
Go Frogs!